Welcome back. I am your host, Dr. Martha, with my remarkable guest, Dawn Daum, and she has been talking to us. So, welcome back. Dawn, before the break, you were talking about that experience that you had at the barbecue. What I wanted to ask you about was when you were actually beginning to experience that issue in the present, were you having simultaneously flashbacks on your own past?
Yes, yes, absolutely. A big trigger for me what would cause the flashbacks a lot of the times was simple touch with my kids. It was basic acts of taking care of them, very normal kind of parenting 101 things, such as breastfeeding, bathing, diapering, giving and receiving affection. All of those things would put me in a state of either dissociation or just reliving the trauma, flashbacks. Parenting the younger children at the youngest ages was the most difficult for me.
Wow. So how did you start putting together healing yourself, basically? How did you do that?
I got to tell you, the biggest thing for me was learning that I wasn't the only one, and that through education that I went seeking, I came across the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experience study, and I would highly recommend if your listeners are not familiar with that. To seek the information out on that study, the ACEs study, because what it did for me was it put science behind what I was experiencing, and it helped me normalize the experience, and that it is absolutely normal to experience things such as flashbacks and struggles with connecting with your children when you experience your own childhood like I had, which was riddled with very traumatic experiences, including sexual abuse.
Okay, so Dawn, where would the listeners go to find the ACE?
We're in a good place right now because the information is getting out. If you just simply Googled Adverse Childhood Experience Study, it's probably going to take you to NPR has a lot of information on it. It will take you to ACEs Connection or ACEs Too High. Both websites are doing a phenomenal job of getting the information out there. It'll introduce you to the study, and it'll also link you to the actual ACE quiz so that you can find out what your own ACE score is. And that will lead you a little bit further into information on what it means for you and how to heal.
Okay, that is wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Mm-hmm. And Dawn, you were also talking about you had to have the science. Did you find that your own emotion would get in the way and hamper you, kind of like freeze you for the moment? But if you found something that was concrete, factual, would help you ground yourself and move yourself forward?
Absolutely. Just understanding what happens to the brain and the stress response system is a game changer, because you go from, I can only speak for me, but I've heard this from others. You go from what is wrong with me, I'm broken, to, okay, I have been triggered, and now I am in survivor mode. I am shutting down because my amygdala has falsely alerted my system that I'm in danger. And having that information, I know I can talk myself down and using grounding techniques to say that, no, you are not in danger. Your system is falsely telling you that because of the experiences I have had. And it can bring me out of that dissociative state and be able to, in the act of, say, breastfeeding, breathe. We forget to breathe, the most simple act. And try to get back in my body and realize what I'm doing is providing life for my child. You know, I'm not a part of, I'm not an abuser. I'm not what I once was when I was a young child. So yes, the science is, for me, it was the number one thing to work towards healing. Absolutely.
Wow, wow, wow. I noticed that you, when we had talked earlier before the broadcast, you were talking about a TED Talk that changed everything for you. Would you like to recount that experience a little bit for our listeners?
I would love to. It changed the trajectory of my life. The TED Talk is done by Dr. Nadine Burt-Harris. And she talks about how trauma affects health across a lifetime. And she does just what she informed me of the science that I was just referring to. It was the first time I had ever heard anything like it. And I was driving home on my way home from work, and I had it saved. I threw it on and I'm listening. Halfway through it, I had to pull over. I was shaking because I knew, I didn't know how, but I knew that she was talking about me. And that's what led me to research the ACEs study that got me so engrossly interested in brain science and how my nervous system and my brain development is different than other people. And so that's why I was experiencing motherhood very differently than some of my friends who didn't have the same childhood experiences. And again, I mean, I just can't say enough what that did to diminish the shame that I was feeling all the time, to the point where I was spiraling so far down that I reached a point where I started to question, are my children better off without me? You know, having this sense of awareness pulled me out of that.
Wow, that's really important there. Wow. You must have just had like this wealth of thoughts and connecting the dots, you know, like the little game or that little thing that we would do is to connect the dots, you know, follow the numbers when we were kids in school. That must have been one of those aha moments that will stay with you. That's an iconic moment for the rest of your life. What came out of that? What started for you? What did you start doing?
Oh man, I have to be honest. I became a little obsessed. I read everything I could find on trauma recovery, on the neuro and social aspects of what it means to have been traumatized and what that can look like through the lifespan. You know, and it was just amazing because not only was it connecting the dots to how I was feeling emotionally, but it was connecting the dots to how I was feeling physically as well. When I was being triggered, I was dealing not only with the emotional aspect of it, but the inflammation that was coming from that. I was diagnosed with arthritis around that same time. I was dealing with severe migraines. Just my system was just completely out of whack. And again, the science helped me make sense of all of it. So I dove as deep as I possibly could into everything resilience and stumbled upon the idea of what it means to be trauma informed, both as a person, an individual, and as a provider, because I have worked in the field of mental health for nearly 20 years now.
Wow. Wow. Yes. What you described is what I espouse to, which is the Biocycle social model, which means that everything that is occurring in our body physically or biomedically has an emotional component to it, and everything that is emotional has a biomedical component to it. So you just described it out of your own lived experience, just exactly what that was. And isn't it amazing when you start connecting and looking at all your own possible triggers that were happening for you and being able to move that in another direction that is your body was trying to tell you something, your emotions were trying to tell you something, but moving you into a direction of more complete understanding and the road to healing. So that's like the trigger points for you, I would guess. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. What I discovered was that it is the triggers that can create a launching pad for healing. If we can learn how to recognize them, then we can kind of remove the fear component that comes with being triggered and recognize it as sort of a window into the parts of us that still need healing. Triggers have become, in a sense, my friends. As crazy as that sounds, it allows me to take a moment and say, okay, I'm being triggered. What does this mean? And I have a better shot at figuring it out now than I did before.
Yes. As you're talking about that, that leads me to want you to talk a little bit more about your revision of your book that you have with Parenting with PTSD, because I'm sure that when we talk about the different triggers, people have talked to me about like around certain smells, certain colors, certain tones, will trigger them into a traumatic event in their life or a traumatic experience. So it's like we don't even know what those triggers are, but if we start having that awareness, there must have been a defining moment for you, Dawn, where you had the awareness where that, and I don't know if you can remember back about it, but that's a trigger for me. I know it's a trigger for me, and you grabbed a hold of it. Can you describe how that happened?
Yeah, so as I started to get more familiar with how common this is, how normal it is, the science behind it, for me, one of my biggest triggers was how I could recognize it in my body was every muscle in my body would tense up. And I would feel, kind of like I said earlier, like I wanted to run away from my child instead of towards them. If I was avoidant of something, then there was a reason for it. And I recognized that. One thing that I really, really, really struggled with, and I made reference to this earlier, was anything that involved touching the child. So diapering. Christina Bayard, one of the authors in the book, she tells a story, and she was the first one that I had ever heard say this. To quote her, she said, "The first time I changed my baby's diaper, an unexpected fear arose within me that if I touched his private parts, I too would be a molester. This caught me off guard." Again, that was a game changer for me when I heard her say that, because I had experienced that too. It's so irrational, and you can recognize in the moment that it's irrational, but it doesn't make the feeling and the fear go away when you're in the act of changing a diaper and you feel you cannot understand why you feel like you're violating the child. In hindsight, of course it makes sense that I would possibly feel that way and that other people have felt that way. I was violated, and I am performing an act where I am touching my child that is going to cause me to feel like I am putting my child at risk. Even though it is a normal kind of parenting 101 thing, it's something that is expected of me that I have to do, that's nurturing. It does not erase the fear until you can understand it. Bathing my child, I was very overwhelmed when my daughter was young, but I was very scared to ask my husband for help, because how do I ask a man to help me with bathing and dressing my child when I had the experiences that I did? So I just sucked it up and went through it and didn't really tell anybody that I was experiencing these things.